Hello, welcome to the Fixed Operations Insights brought to you by Dynatron Software and NCM Associates. I'm Maureen Martin, Dynatron VP of Strategic Alliances, and with me today are Rick Uhlin, the NCM instructor and consultant, and James Grogan, Dynatron EVP Sales, Marketing, and Client Success. So we're going to get kicked off 2025 Q1 update. We're going to look first at NCM Fixed Operations update and what they're seeing from the financial statements, their 20 groups, and all the things they're doing in the Institute. And then we're going to really talk about these uncertain times and how do we turn it into profits. James is then going to take us through a best practice that you can implement today. They're going to help you to bring more increased revenue into your dealership. So with that, Rick, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Maureen. We'll go ahead and jump in the first slide. So it probably comes as no surprise that as margin continues to compress, and although we've had a lot of drop, you can see our net to gross is down to 32.5 after the first quarter, ending last year at 33, so down a half a point. So definitely not the trajectory we want, but it is slowing a little bit. So the pace of the drop is slowing. Net to sales down 1/10 of a point, from 4.7 down to 4.6. Overall, that's about the right ratio in terms of how that would lay out. So I feel like we are slowing down, and this is through March. I think dealers had a really tough start January, February. March was a good month, so it's a good recovery month. So it looks like they made up a lot of ground in March. And April, from what I'm hearing, is the early numbers are coming in pretty solid for April. So I feel good about that. So next slide. So service operations. Obviously, we deal with those three drivers of the metrics here, but the margin stayed about the same. Really didn't change a whole lot in the first quarter. Net to gross up 1/10 of a point, so that's good. So dealers are doing well in service as far as the net to gross, but we're still below that threshold of 30%, which is our goal. So we got to continue to work towards that. Net to sales at 17.6, down about 0.7, which means expenses crept up a little bit here, obviously, and chipped into it. So people at 46.1, I think our goal here would be, that's not a bad number, but 40 to 45 is optimal. So at 46.1, we're a little over that midway point. We never want to break 50, so that's what we teach at the Institute. But dealers are doing pretty well. Same story, though. Kind of a rough start, January, February, good March. And April, the early numbers are good, especially pre-owned cars continue to have some momentum, which brought some internal sales as well. So next slide. All right, so parts operations. This is our steady Eddie here, right? 48.1 at the end of the year, 47.9 net to gross now, down just a couple tenths. And you can tell it's coming from net to sales is actually up a little bit. So expense control is still good. Margin compressed here a little bit. We want to see 40%. 36 is okay. Solid job, I would say. But if we're using the tools properly to maximize our matrices and our grids, we should be working towards 40%. So we need to continue to work on that, but still some very good effort from the parts department doing a solid job. And then we will talk about probably the underlying issue of the year, I think, will be played out. But last year we ended down a half a point on CPRO count. And we kind of know with January and February, we get weather. So you kind of never know in the market, what those results, how weather impacted they were. So you don't want to make a trend analysis after January, February. So March, we like to see a pretty solid recovery. And unfortunately, that has not been the case for us. So next slide, if you would, Maureen. And we're just going to jump into kind of where we are first quarter. And unfortunately, look at the CPRO counts in column number 4. As a U.S. auto summary down 3.9%. That is a alarming number. That's an alarming number after the first quarter. So we're going to have to fight our way out of this a little bit, especially in the second quarter, in what is not an unstable market, but an unsure market, right? The tariff discussion is causing a lot of people to just think twice. So there's a lot of things going on, a lot of hesitation. So we'll see how that plays out over the coming weeks. But Highline down 4.7% on RO count. Imports down 1%, and domestics a pretty substantial number, down 6.7. And so that's a pretty good cross section of the country of the brands that we represent. And that's an alarming statistics. Customer pay labor sales, column 5, and the percent of change, column 6, at 2.8%. So again, margin management's good. I think effective rates have held up, and dealers are still working to get what they can per dollar. Warranty labor sales, massive increase, 31% through March. And I think that's, again, it's two things. It's rate management, I think, which everybody's doing a good job getting their rates under control or getting their max value. But unfortunately, the other aspect is recalls are just through the roof. And of course, there's some other ones that have just recently announced that are very substantial for one of the big three that they're going to be dealing with. So this continue to be an area that we're going to look at, probably moving forward. What kind of work mix are we really doing in the shop? So we maybe approach that in our next call. So internal labor sales, solid number, 7.9. I think that, again, that's the used car market in March was very good. Dealers got a lot of cars recon, moved a lot of metal in the month of March. Customer pay parts sales holding on steady. Internal parts sales, again, a lift along with the internal labor. So good solid effort in the first quarter. And wholesale parts, I think this is 2 quarters in a row. Wholesale parts is down. And this is a byproduct of, less new cars in the market over the last 5 years, all the different supply constraints and things that we had. I think we're seeing that. A lot of more totaled vehicles with technology. So overall, the data is a little scary, but nothing to alarm. We'll see how the second quarter goes. So, we wanted to focus on hours per RO because we got 3 drivers to sales. One being customer pay RO count, which we just talked about, which has been compromised and which we're dealing and fighting through. The other is effective rate in hours per RO. So we're going to talk about the effective rate, obviously, is the tool that Dynatron is all about making the most of. Hours per RO has to come from our service advisors' selling techniques. And it has to come from our process, our road to the sale and service. Retail labor hours per RO, so that's mechanical labor hours per RO at 2.2. Now, this is an overall industry. We don't get into the metrics on the 3 areas right now because of the brand variances. But overall, 2.2's a little soft. We should be looking at probably about 2.5. Quick lane at 0.95, not even an hour per. I think every dealer in the country would like to see about a 1.3 out of quick lane. So there's some opportunity there, and that money is there. That's selling techniques, I believe, and also just pressure on volume. Retail combined, mechanical and express, when you lump it all together based on the weighted averages of the number of repairs versus quick lane, we're looking at 2.1 hours per RO overall. And creeping up right behind it, which was really interesting to me and why I wanted to bring it up, is the warranty hours per RO at 1.6. So that's closing. That's getting to be a pretty common, on some brands we see it's almost the same. Customer pay hours per RO and warranty hours per RO are the same. And in some cases, their warranty work mix is almost, half their business. So when you think about that, rate management, controlling the rates, and the selling process itself, I think is what's going to help move these numbers. But these are numbers we need to work on. I think there's at least 0.3 hours per RO in each of the categories, whether it's in the shop through the MPI process or the quick lane. And I think James is going to talk to us about some tactics to get us there.
Rick, thank you so much. Between NCM and Dynatron, we work with so many dealerships nationally, and I always love the perspective that you provide from NCM on your benchmarks and really what you're seeing in the financial statements and how it's balanced with what we bring from Dynatron on the transactional data from the dealers. And absolutely, work mix is something that we're talking about with the dealers all the time, in addition to the variable pricing strategy and that you talked about. And really, in these uncertain times, one thing we know for a fact, dealers have to lean in more than ever into fixed operations for net profit of their stores. We're going to manage through this like we have every other thing that's hit us in the automotive industry in my 38 years, is that the resilience of this industry is incredible, and how we come together and use that data that we both provide to help the dealers to really shape that plan and that strategy. In some of our prior episodes, we've talked about some things that really have an impact, right? We've talked about proper discounting in the past that James shared best practices. We've talked about no one item ROs, which has a direct impact, right, to what we're talking about today. But I think you really hit on something that really carries through is how do we really look at service as sales? And I know that that's what James is going to be talking about today. And I think it beautifully delves into what you shared from NCM on what you're seeing with your benchmarks and the performance of the dealership. So thank you for that. So James, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about services sales and a best practice here.
Yeah, so thank you very much. We've seen it coming out of 2024 and really into 2025 that, we have to start to change our mind shift that the service department is one of, if not our biggest sales department. And you look at the numbers, and even with an uptick in new car sales in the first quarter, service sales is really where the profitability still lies. So today, I just want to go real quick, and I just want to do a quick refresher of let's review our service sales process. On some of the other calls, we talked on the meetings, we talked about how service and sales is together. Well, today I want to really kind of dive into just a high level reviewing that process. Now, I'm sure most dealers have a process. So is this bulletproof step by step? Obviously, you might do more, you might do a little less, but I think it's time to reevaluate that. So the first thing we have to do is, greeting the client quickly and with a positive outlook. I think the first impression that we make on a client is really going to take us through that whole sales process, that whole service process, really that whole engagement for that vehicle. And if they're not greeted quickly and they're not greeted with a smile and the advisors aren't introducing themselves, it really sets what could be a negative tone, unfortunately, for the visit for the client.
And James, that's really interesting because if we think our dealers are dealing with uncertain times, our customers are even more heightened than that. So that's really an excellent point about how they're just the whole persona when a customer drives in. Do they see that confidence? Love it.
So, complete an introduction phase. So obviously everybody's got their own little thing. This is just some bullet points to make sure that we're reviewing the process. Are we still doing a walk around and a quality walk around with the customer, right? Are we reviewing their initial concern and really understanding and asking questions and what's going on with the vehicle? Why are they bringing it in today? What is their, goal for this visit? And then are we asking the magic question? The magic question is said a different way, a couple different ways, but it's really just what is their intent for the long term of the vehicle? Are they getting out of the vehicle soon? Are they planning to keep it? And really, that should allow us how to now plan that customer's visit and some of the needs that we might need to go over. So we also want to talk about our MPI process. It is imperative that we educate the client that we're going to do a multi-point inspection, the value of that multi-point inspection, what it brings, right? We want to ensure that video, text, however we do that multi-point is an option and it's approved, right? The last thing we want to do is contact a customer in a way that they're not expecting. So approving a video or a text option, especially if you're using that software, right? We also want to discuss the timing and what to expect. No reason at no time should a customer get a contact from the dealership and really not have any idea what it's about and not be expecting it. So we want to complete, quote, the write-up phase, right? So once again, super high level, ensure that our repair order is documented properly with the initial concern. One of the things we have to do is we have to make sure we address the reason why the customer came in. All the other things that we're going to discuss with them are great and have a ton of value, but if we don't address an initial concern, we lose sight of really connecting with that client. So then we want to present current maintenance. That's based on normal or severe driving conditions. Most states during the summer, during the winter, fall into that severe driving conditions outline. So we really want to make sure we're providing the right maintenance schedule and making sure the customer understands and knows what's due on their vehicle. And lastly, we want to present historically declined items. The worst thing that we can do is recommend items to a client, and when they come back, not mention them again, right? So if we remember on our other things we talked about, these were the 3 phases of the sale. But really, this is important during the write-up phase that we attack all 3 of these things and make sure that it's happening on a consistent basis.
Hey, James, let me jump in if you could back up Maureen quickly. The walk around used to be the way advisors monetized the event, the service write-up, right? MPI well, let's talk about 20, 25 years ago, maybe, 20 years ago, it didn't really exist. So you built rapport with the car, you walked around the car, you built, you looked at the car together. It's almost like a cup of coffee without a cup of coffee type environment. And you're getting their primary item and you're just chatting and looking for opportunities together. MPI takes over and MPI rockets us up. We have a great ride. Everybody gets a big lift from MPI. It becomes the dominant thing. And for some reason, the world forgets the walk around. And we let it, like, we could have taken and lifted from both areas, but we gave one area up and adapted another one that paid a little better. But if you can get the walk around back in the game, that's a couple 3/10 when they get it nailed down, when they get it polished. And so it's just great that you brought those up. They're important. We don't want to give up on one just because we get good at another. So we need to bring them both back and optimize them at the advisor level.
In the walk around to that, Rick, even the walk around is where you build rapport with the client, the customer,
Absolutely.
correct? Like that is the best part to start talking about, if they have a sticker on the back of their car, or something, and really connecting with them and humanizing this whole transaction where, let's be honest, coming to the dealership, it's maybe second to going to the dentist, right? And from a service side. So, anytime you can humanize the transaction, especially during the walk around, and talk about the additional needs of the vehicle, it drives a ton of value. So definitely thanks for pointing that out.
And it really builds the confidence of the technician who's going to be the expert looking at their vehicle, right? That you don't get anywhere else except for at a car dealership. So I love that. That's great. All right.
So we also want to set follow-up expectations. One of the biggest missteps is we do everything great up front, the customer leaves, and somehow they go into a black hole of communication, right? So we need to set follow-up expectations. We need to discuss when we'll contact them with an update, right? Whether it's text, via phone call, via email, whatever the customer prefers, right? And then when can they expect their concern to be addressed, right? So when can they expect an update if it's a diagnostic issue? If it's maintenance, when can they expect it to be ready? And really ensuring that they have a timeline of expectations, not just for contact, for their concern to be addressed too as well. Before any client leaves, we need to ensure that all their questions and concerns are addressed. The last thing we want to do is end a transaction with a customer when there's additional items that we should be talking about, when there's additional items we could have serviced for them, or there's additional needs that maybe they were wanting to tell us about. So we want to always ask at the very end to make sure that there's nothing else that we need to address for the client while they're in. So after the inspection, we want to review the MPI results with the client, whether this is via phone, in person, video, whatever MPI process you're currently using. I think the biggest takeaway on this is reviewing all recommendations, right? We're not picking and choosing. We're not hitting them with just the reds, not talking about maybe the yellows or the things that aren't due yet, but we're providing them a full diagnostic of their vehicle based on what the technician recommends and really allowing them to choose what they want to do, especially based on what their plans are for the vehicle, kind of referencing back to the magic question. And then we want to ensure that we have some sort of variation of the RIM or SEO presentation method so that the options are clearly broken up so that customer really can make the best decision possible for them and for their vehicle. And lastly, with any item that's presented, we want to keep in mind that we need to answer the 6 W's. Okay, what is it? Where is it? What does it do? What happens if the service is not completed? Okay, what is the cost to complete? And then when can it be completed? So if we're handling the MPI, we're providing the recommendations, we need to make sure that we're answering the 6 W's as well. And that really gives the client the full vision, gives them a ton of education into what's going on with their vehicle. And it really makes them feel like we are truly the experts and that they can trust that work with us. And then lastly, you've heard us say it before, at Dynatron, we believe sales is just a conversation, right? And so really all of this should be a friendly, an educational conversation. We never want it to come across as a sales pitch because really what it is informing them of what we found so they can make a decision on one of the biggest investments they have. So just as a real quick refresher from our last meeting, because we think this is very important, especially for a lot of our general managers and corporate leaders, is when you look at a sales department, and you look how we measure sales success on the left, and then you look at a service department and you measure how we look at service success on the right, there's a lot of correlation, right? So everything from number of appointments to number of demos to estimates to closing ratio, right, to gross. And really, I think as we grow into 2025 and as we continue to see some of the challenges this year might bring, it's very important that we really continue to wrap our head around this and we really start to measure these and set some benchmarks and really start to ensure that as we're moving the needle in sales, we are also continuing to move that needle in service. Because once again, it is the largest sales department we have.
Thank you so much, both of you. I love the interaction of just talking about, what we've learned in the past, what we can apply in the future, and how we integrate technology has really allowed us to do a lot of the things you both talked about. But it really comes down at the end of the day, in these uncertain times, we know that we can build the confidence. We're the experts. We build it with not only our dealerships, but we build it with our customers, our guests that come into the dealership. And so I want to thank both of you. Rick, again, thank you so much. Love the perspective always from NCM and the benchmarks and financial statements and what you're hearing in your 20 groups. James, thank you for always bringing a very relevant and actionable takeaway from today, what we can do in a best practice to increase revenue and always have superior retention. That's key to both what NCM and Dynatron believe in. And so I really appreciate the fact that you brought both of that together today. We want to thank all of you for joining us for this Q1 2025 episode of the Fixed Operations Insights, brought to you by NCM and Dynatron Software. If you'd like to learn more, if you have any questions, you can just hover over the QR code, give us your contact information, and we will definitely reach out to you. We thank you so much for joining us again today. Thank you both, James and Rick. I hope you all have a wonderful day.